Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I am so delighted to be here. I hope you are feeling like I am, energized, feeling as if I'm learning new things already this morning. And certainly I'm impressed with the people I get to share the day with, as well as the panel that you are about to meet very shortly and hear some of their ideas. One of the things we're going to do in the next hour and 15 minutes or so, each of the panelists is going to take a couple minutes and introduce herself. Notice we're all females. Introduce herself. Yeah, that was a dig to you. I didn't want to bring it out, but that was a dig to you. But we're all going to introduce ourselves, and then I have a few questions that I hope will be interesting to you, but will also afford the panelists an opportunity to get into a little bit more of their expertise around children and families. After that, we have a couple questions for the audience that we would greatly appreciate your participation. So I'm going to go last, but why don't I start to my far right?
Can you hear me? Is on? Okay. Hi, thank you very much for having me. I'm Jennifer Podkol. I'm the Director of Policy of Kids of Need and Defense, KIND. We are a national organization and we provide legal counsel to unaccompanied immigrant children in their removal proceedings, in their immigration proceedings. And what's interesting about this panel, first of all, I'm so happy to be included in this conversation and to be working with you all. I think earlier it was noted we often silo ourselves, and I think the issue of immigrant children is really siloed. I think we think of it as an immigration issue and not a children's issue, and it's something that we're always thinking about and talking about and really learning how to catch up to you all in terms of advocating for children and really framing the issue as a children's issue and a children's rights issue. So thank you very much for including this perspective here today. I also wanted to just take a few minutes and talk about this term unaccompanied I use. I said KIND represents unaccompanied children, and I just want to put this in context. I think when you think of an unaccompanied child, you think of a child without any family, and that's really a misnomer. A child is deemed unaccompanied under federal law when they are apprehended and the government decides, so that's usually a Border Patrol agent, that there is no parent or legal guardian available to provide care and custody for that child in that moment. So in the desert when that child's apprehended, or at the port of entry, if the government themselves separates the child from a parent, then they will say, that child's unaccompanied. This parent, we've decided we're going to send them to a detention facility far, far away. Therefore, there's no parent available to provide care and custody. The children that we're representing, these immigrant children, they are often accompanied in their home country by some sort of family member who's been providing care for them, or they're trying to reunify with some family member, sometimes a parent, sometimes a legal guardian, extended family or community contact here in the United States. So when I say unaccompanied, I think again what it does, using that term, really makes us think of this as a child alone and just a child. So everything that we're doing and engaging in that child, with that child in the immigration system, we're thinking of them as an individual unit. We're not thinking of them as a family unit and part of the family and what we need to do to either reunify this family or support this family, or how family can support this child. When children are represented, I know Martine talked about this earlier, they're overwhelmingly winning their cases for humanitarian protection in the United States, which means they're going to be able to stay in the United States permanently and more often than not can get citizenship. So we think of immigrant kids as kind of these kids over here. They're actually our kids, right? They're going to be US citizens. We need to be thinking about how we can support them because they're going to be part of our communities and living with us for the rest of their lives. And so thinking about what is it in this child's case that we need to do to support them? So if they end up staying here and becoming US citizens, what are they going to need and what are their families going to need to support that transition? And if they don't decide to stay here, they're not able to stay here, What are we doing to support family reunification back in the home country for that child? These are not questions that are asked at all in the immigration context. A child is treated as an individual, just like a little tiny adult, and they have their own case. They have to be responsible for getting their own lawyer, and nobody asks them at the border, do you want, is there somebody you want to be with or you need to be with? Were you just separated? None of that goes into their file. The only information that goes into their file right now is about what the child can communicate to that agent who's wearing a badge and a uniform and a gun, who may have just apprehended them in the desert, what information that child is giving to that Border Patrol officer or agent, and then the kid has to make their own case. We immediately put the child into deportation proceedings, like prosecution. There's no consideration of best interest. There's no pause to let us try to figure out, is there some family member or reunification that we can be doing while this child is a child? We immediately start the prosecution, the deportation proceedings. This is in contrast to the European Union. They have a process by which they pause the immigration prosecution and consider what would be in the best interest of the child. Even if they need to move that kid to a different country within the European Union, they prioritize family reunification and the child's safety and the consideration of the best interest of the child over immigration enforcement. So I'll leave it there. We can talk about it, some more details, a little bit more.
Great, thank you. My name is Julia Wilson, and I promise you that I will be the odd woman out on our panel today. If today got a grade, I'm the person guaranteed to force the curve higher. So you're all promised that I'll be at the bottom. I'm not a practicing lawyer anymore, and the thing I think I'm going to cling to, some vestige of respectability for being here today, is that at the beginning of my career as a legal aid lawyer, I did represent kids who were in low income in accessing a range of services, including healthcare and education and public benefits. But that was a long time ago. So I think the system that I'm here to talk about today, which is also a bit of an odd system out, is the civil legal aid system itself. And how does that sort of convoluted, diffuse, diverse, somewhat opaque system treat kids and their legal needs, both when they're presenting as clients on their own and when they're embedded in families? So I run a nonprofit called One Justice. We consider ourselves a think and do tank on the civil justice system in California. So we operate to first analyze and understand that system, and then where we can, improve and strengthen it. We work as a policy tank on advocacy for increased funding and other regulatory issues at the state and federal level. We work with the nonprofits in that system to increase both their business skills and their their pro bono design and implementation skills. And then where there are structural deficits, where folks can't get services either because of the substantive area or geography, we actually do run pro bono projects that provide direct services. So my perspective is sort of civil legal aid strictly, and what do we know about how that system handles both families and kids? It's a little bit like reading tea leaves, in that broad shapes might be visible, and if you want to, you can draw some interpretation and takeaway, but it's about that clear. At a national level, we know there's a need, right? This won't be surprising to any of you. There's about 18 million families with kids under the age of 18 that we know are eligible, at least, for free legal services. So that's the potential pool at a national level. And we know that 80% of those households report having at least one civil justice incident, or what we call a life problem that happens to have a legal solution, and that about 35% of them have 6 or more legal problems. So we know that there's this pool of families, that there are kids, and that they have a high level of civil justice incidents. The highest tend to be health related. Next is consumer and finance issues, income maintenance, which is usually public benefits. And only then do we get to sort of children's issues or custody issues, which are directly related to the kids. Family law is next, and then at the end, employment and education. The other piece that we know from some federal studies is that of those families that have those civil justice incidences, about 87% of them receive either no or inadequate civil legal services to help them resolve those life problems. So in the face of significant documented need, the civil justice system is not well-resourced enough and perhaps not organized in ways that actually provide adequate assistance. And that leads to my sort of general argument, understanding this system and how it thinks about and treats families and children's, is that we have this wide range of civil legal needs that are experienced by either the adults or the children or both. And that we know that those legal needs have negative consequences, both for the adults and the children and families, but we don't know more than those broad statements. And so being able to identify either upstream solutions or downstream interventions becomes a little bit like a guessing game. The only thing, and I should say I work only in California, so in terms of the response, my lens is specific to this state. We know that of the 75 or so civil legal aid programs in the state, which are the only nonprofits that make their data available at an aggregate level, they're serving between 19,000 to 23,000 kids as clients each year. So when they're asked, was your client under the age of 18, they say yes for 19 to 23,000 people. That's a large enough body. It's about 10%, a little less than 10% of the total cases closed each year. And all we know is that those clients existed and that about 85% of them are kids of color. We can't then correlate that to what substantive area of law they received services in or what level of service, ranging from sort of legal information and advice all the way to full scope representation. All we know is that raw number. When we look at the organizations that produce those cases, it's actually a very small number. 80% of those cases are closed by 5 organizations in the state. So there's a high volume approach, but with not much more information than that. And about half of the legal aid organizations in the state respond that they serve no or less than 10 clients who are under the age of 18 per year. So there's a wide disparity between sort of where kids are getting served. And I'll note that 4 of those 5 operate only in urban areas. So if you're a rural low-income kid with a civil legal need, right now you're not showing up in this system anywhere. The last thing I'll say is the only other data that we have is a subcategory of cases which are called juvenile cases by the state bar, and that tends to cover things like adoptions and some guardianships, and some of it's open to interpretation. We know there's about 7,000 to 10,000 cases, we think, of those 19 to 23,000 that show up in that area, and then we do know level of service. About 35% of those cases are getting full scope representation. So again, in these cases that we know, I mean, the hypothesis is that those are clients that are under the age of 18, they're labeled as a juvenile, 35% of them get full scope representation. That's actually dramatically higher than other substantive areas where only about 15% of cases get full representation. So what does all this mean? That we need more data. We need more data and understand what the experience of families and children in these civil justice incidences are. And I'll just say 2 other things and we can talk more about it, but there are 2 additional pieces, which is when an adult in a family experiences a civil justice or a civil legal aid need, we know that there's a cascading effect, which is not surprising, right? Housing instability, hunger, food insecurity, of course, this ripples out through the family member and the entire household. But so we have to operate from the premise that even though we're not seeing those kids in the data right now, that there is a cascading effect through the family. The other thing is that there's a clustering effect, which is that when we see a family experience a legal need in the civil justice arena, they cluster, meaning it increases the likelihood that they're more along the range of 6 or even in some states 9 legal needs, and that the instability in the family system caused by civil justice stressors creates civil legal needs in the other individuals in the family. So I'll just leave it there, meaning I have nothing to say except we need more data.
I do not want more data. I honestly don't know how I got on this panel. I want you to keep these expectations very low in regards to me. I am not a lawyer. I did day one once. And my little sisters, one is a public defender and one is a 3L, one's a 1L. I was the alleged murderer in a mock trial at the law school, so I feel like I did really well convincing. So as far as the law goes, I hope I am not breaking it most of the time. But as far as keeping families together, that is something that, hopefully lawfully, I do pretty well. I actually grew up, my parents were 19 when they had little old me. And for some reason, the 80s were a crazy time, and the state of Missouri felt like it was okay to license them as foster parents. They do not meet standards now, I'm gonna tell you that right now. Thank God things worked out, and I'm still alive. But since that time, they also had 4 younger biological sisters and have adopted 22 children in the past 35 years. So my expertise is that. Yeah, I guess I was born to be a social worker. I don't know. I can't tell if I love it or if it's just the only thing I know. But one of the things, usually when I'm on panels, it's because there are foster parents or soon-to-be foster parents that want to hear from the bio kids about the damage that it's done to the family unit. So I just want to start with that real quick. I never understood that. I don't know what terrible things it did to me having the children. I mean, I got lice a lot. And, you know, that was back before you had to get permission for haircuts. And so, you know, Baba with the mullet on the bus with me was never fun. But, you know, the terrible sympathy and compassion and patience and understanding and acceptance that I got from that doesn't really seem all that terrible. So I guess I don't really understand most points of view with that. I guess, though, I never felt any doubt. I don't think there was ever a time in my life where I thought, God, my mom and dad, they don't love me because they're spending so much time with this kid that's lighting the closet on fire. That never crossed my mind. I never doubted that they loved me. It was okay, they missed my games. My dad was obnoxious anyway. I didn't need him there. But that was okay because I knew those kids, they had much bigger problems than I did, and I knew that they loved me, and those kids needed to know that somebody cared about them. So that's sort of how it started. When I was in high school, my mom got bored, I guess, with 20 kids, because that's super boring, and then started an agency called Midwest Foster Care and Adoption Association. I was 3 people who just wanted to fill gaps for foster parents. They were experienced foster parents and saw that newbies were getting ran over, weren't being told what their rights were, weren't being allowed to be members of the professional team, weren't being validated and honored as the people who are with the child the most, who know what's going on because they're just foster parents. So it started that way. I worked pro bono doing the newsletter because they didn't know how to work computers. That was a good time. After college, I did go to the Gillis Boys Home, where I worked with I love older teenage criminal boys, they're my favorite. And worked with their families on teaching them how to be families. And this is, I was 23. I was like, wow, I'm a good parent. I'm so good at this. Probably not. So I started there, and then MFCA continued to grow, and they started a program called Extreme Recruitment. I don't know if you've heard of Extreme Recruitment, but unadoptable or harder to place kids, the kids who have been in foster care for 2 years to 10 years, which is absurd, who of course have higher level of behaviors and the trauma experience and disruptions because Well, they've been in care for that long, and we remove them from their home, promising them to place them in a safe and appropriate home, and they're in congregate care now. So yeah, I bet it's a little bit more difficult. So extreme recruitment, my mom was telling me about it, and she said, yeah, it's like extreme home makeover. You know, I was like, oh, okay, Ty. What I did when I started Extreme Recruitment with MFCA was, it was myself, and then we have a retired Kansas City police detective who was on Vice, undercover, awesome. He can find anybody. Basically those kids, the caseworker said, you'll never get them adopted, no way. No way, this kid is, no, not happening. Ha, gotcha. We would do concurrent recruitment. So general recruitment, the websites, you know, all the Heart Gallery, all that fun stuff, targeted recruitment, people who are already licensed for behavioral level youth, child specific. We would ask the kid, you know, hey, who have you felt safe with? When you were living at your parents' house, was there a neighbor? Did you have a coach? Was there a pastor? Someone that if you felt like you were in trouble, who'd you think it was okay to call? We wouldn't say, hey, guess what? We're getting you adopted. That's never how we approached it, because that never works out well. And then we did relative family finding, which once again is so crazy to me that there are so many barriers thrown up with relatives. And I hear all the time, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. You know, if it's in the family, they're all bad news. Oh, please, I have terrible siblings, and I'm not nearly that bad. Like, come on, it's like falling way over there. So we had to, of course, slowly but surely, unpack the no of all the professionals. They'd say, oh no, we can't place with relatives. They use drugs. Oh, they do, all of them? Wow, that's amazing, you know that. Give me their phone numbers. Nope, we don't know any. So what we do is we had a minimum. We basically had 20 weeks, and in that 20 weeks, we had to find at least 50 relatives for the genogram. Our average, I think, at this point is 120, because we are winning. And in that 20 weeks, we exhaust every single avenue that we can to find them permanency. Our goal is permanency all day. So that's extreme recruitment, and we can talk later about how amazing that is. We've been doing that since 2012. We've served 260 kids. We've had over 60 adoptions, 20 guardianships. I'm trying to think what else. Oh, 15 reunifications, because once again, growing up in the house that I grew up in, where we didn't just have my grandma and grandpa, we had my brother's grandma and grandpa. Like, I had Grandma Mary, I had Grandma Patty, all of their biological families ended up my family. We were all just one big happy. My parents are, no, if you can take your kids back, sure, let's do this. If not, I'll take them, whatever, but let's work this out. So the openness that I got from them was pretty helpful. On the front end, we have 30 days to family, which if every single organization in the United States had 30 days to family for the moment a child in our custody, we wouldn't need foster homes. We wouldn't really need much of anything. Our 30-day specialist gets a call from our placement line, says we've got a kid who was just taken into custody. We have the 72-hour meeting tomorrow and the PC hearing. Can you be here? Absolutely. So that 30-day specialist only gets one case at a time, 2 max, but they have to be separated out, because in that 30 days, she has to find 150 relatives. She has to find 3 placement options, 1 definite, 2 backups. She has to do every single background check, walk through of the houses. She has to write mini home studies for all 3 homes, has to do the references, all of that. Has to talk to the judge about changing the court order to appropriate placement instead of appropriate license placement. She has to do the walkthrough, make sure there's furniture available. That child has to be placed with the relative or kin within the first 30 days. The reason that is because it's shown it greatly reduces the trauma and the long-lasting effect it has on our kids if they are with people that love them and that they know. And I love foster families, you know. My mom and dad are okay. So I'm not against that. But if you can be with someone that you feel safe and comfortable with, if it's going towards reunification, the same thing has shown that it's more likely to work out, because now you have that natural support that knows the system that will hold you accountable. And if it's not, you have that permanent resource that keeps you connected with your family. It's amazing. So that is great. And then we realized with extreme recruitment, oh my God, we got these kids adopted. Guess what? Adoption doesn't fix everything. I know that's crazy. You think, poof, they're all better. There's no behaviors. So disruptions were occurring. And then we thought, you know, it'd be really cool if instead of sending kids to residential facilities, we put residential facilities in their homes. Dun, dun, dun. So, I know, crazy. So we did it. My boss, she called the Missouri Children's Division director and said, hey, here's an idea. You give me some of that money that you spent on residential treatment, and I'm going to make this program that is going to keep kids in families and not disrupting, because we will have highly trained one-on-one staff who are trained in verbal de-escalation, crisis de-escalation, who are bachelor's, master's level, who can do the Bruce Perry neurostim activities, rewire the neural pathways. You know, therapy's great, but it doesn't work unless during escalation they actually snap all the way up here where they can think. If you stop in fight, flight, or freeze, you're not going any higher. So being able to do, and they have a requirement, at least 6 neurostim activities per shift. We're rebuilding brains, literally saving the world, so you're welcome. And and right now, those numbers, I started that in 2014. I think we're at, I've got it written down because it's awesome. 260, I don't know where it went. There it is, 299 children served so far since 2014. We have it at 3 locations. We have grown to 5 BI case coordinators who supervise 30 behavioral interventionists and 30 clients. So it's like they're case managers and staff managers. We also have quality assurance, so we make sure all of our notes are Medicaid compliant, all that fun stuff for audits, because everybody loves that. And outcomes, because our outcomes are insane. Parent satisfaction, to be able to have a kid who you know is driving you crazy. It takes, you don't want to send your kid to residential. It's got to be hard, so the kid has to be very hard to deal with. To be able to say I love you at night to your kid and mean it, that's a big deal. And to be that kid and to know that you might have destroyed the kitchen earlier and, you know, kicked the dog down the stairs, and you had to be put in a safety hold for a little bit, but everything's okay. Mom just came in and said I love you, and you know, it wasn't mom yelling at me all day and dealing with that, and I was playing basketball as a neurostim activity, and it's home. Because you can learn things in congregate care, not as easy to transfer those over to the home, and kids heal in homes. And we want to keep them there. So where there's a gap in a service, what we do is we say, let's figure it out. Somebody's got money for us, I'm sure. So that's what I do.
Do you see why I said it's an honor to serve with these ladies? So my name is Patricia Martin, and I'm the presiding judge of the Child Protection Division in Cook County, Chicago, and I've been in that position since January of 2000. I think the best way to introduce myself is to tell you how I got to child protection as a judge, and then kind of how I've evolved, I think is the best way of saying it, as a judge to today. So prior to being elected, I was a public defender and I did criminal defense work. So when I got elected, I assumed I was going to a criminal courtroom until I got to the chief judge's office when he said, Pat, I think you should go to child protection. And I was like, what is that? And so I got to child protection, and I think anyone who has not grown up in this work, when you start this work, it is a shock to your system. Talking about cultural shock. And remember, I was a public defender in Chicago, so it was still a cultural shock. But I will tell you that the one thing I quickly learned was that if we have any opportunity to put words to what we traditionally say, that children are our future, this is a place where you have to get involved. There is no other place in the judicial system that I know of where I have completely innocent victims. Think about it. My children do absolutely nothing to be before my bench but be born to a particular set of parents. And I use the term parents lightly sometimes. But I also learned that children don't grow well in state care and that they need people who can parent them, whether it's their bio parents or another set of parents that I find for them. And so that started my journey in child protection, and now I've been here 18 years as the presiding judge. I hope that one of the things I can work with you and have a conversation with you today is about putting meat behind the word prevention. I think we talk about prevention. I would suggest to you today, in 2018, we have to do more than just talk about prevention. I'm in a jurisdiction where our caseloads have gone down over 60%. I'm in a jurisdiction where we've done a lot of innovative programming. But what would happen if we figured out ways to keep families together without coming into the system? What would it look like when I'm actually in my office and I get a phone call about help for me and my kids, and my answer doesn't start with, well, you're not in the system, so there's not much I can do to help you? What would it look like if we had a courtroom that was designed to keep families together? What would it look like if a mother and her kids walking into my courtroom knew that I was not going to separate them? And so in Cook County, what we're doing today is we have what we call a Prevention Intact Family Courtroom. And what I've done is I've talked with my director, and the cases, we call them voluntary cases, and you have them in all jurisdictions. They're called by different names. But these are cases where the hotline has been called on a particular family. The department sends their investigator out, they examine and investigate the situation, and they determine that there's something there, but it's not enough something to file a petition right now. So what we traditionally do is we give mom a sheet of paper and say, look, you can participate in these voluntary services, go get substance abuse, go get whatever. And then we will let you keep your kid. Or you can voluntarily take your kid to your sister's house, participate in all these services, and your kid can come back. Now, it takes someone, a case manager, who goes to school to become a case manager to help parents figure out how to access services and do it in a way that's reasonably, effective. So how do we expect a mother with 3, 4 kids who have few resources, who doesn't know the system, afraid of the system, figure it out on her own? So what my director has done is she's hired a social worker outside of her union. So that means, I'm from Chicago, I know unions. That means I can have a social worker go at 8 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night, right? And what we do with these families is they come in my courtroom and it's set up as a mediation. So they and I sit down and talk. I have my robe on, but I sit as close to mom as I'm sitting to Liz. And we have a conversation, and the session, it's not a court hearing, the session begins with me asking Liz, what can I do to help you? If I owned the world and I could give you everything you need to keep your children home and safe, what is it you think that I need to give you? Or how can I help you? And so then what happens is my social worker, and I have a court coordinator that's actually on my payroll, who's my court coordinator for my regular courtroom, where I'm taking kids. And she helps find the services that I request. So I have not requested that mom participate in parenting classes, but I have a parenting coach coming to mom's home. Lori's Children's Hospital has got a mobile health clinic that comes up to my courthouse on my session days. And every family who comes to my voluntary prevention court, they can use Lori's as their home medical care provider. All of my kids' medical needs are taken care of by Lori's. I also have mental health services that are provided through the department. Now, how she pays for it, I don't know. I'm not asking. I'm just telling them I need them. But so what's happening is we're taking services and bringing them to the mother and the family in their home to the extent possible. We're bringing the hospital to the court, even though it's not their home, it's as close as I can get. And we're making certain that mom directs what the services are she needs. Now, there's also times when I have conversations with mom and I say, well, son of a gun, that sounds pretty good, but I also think you need this. It's completely voluntary. It's a contract between mom and Judge Martin. Mom can leave at any time she wants. Judge Martin will keep her case, for lack of a better term, on my 6-month calendar. If in fact I think you need more than 6 months, I can extend it once, but you can leave any time. And of course, the other stipulations apply. If the department finds another allegation, they can certainly investigate. I don't preclude any further investigations. And the parents understand that when they sign their consent with me. So the idea is, rather than figuring out how to stop treating families and kids on a conveyor belt, let's not get them on the conveyor belt. Right? Let's keep them off the conveyor belt, but empower them to use community-based services when they need them. One of the advantages that each and every one of us in this room has is we know how to ask for help when we need it. And if we don't know where to go, we have resources to find out where to go. And that's one of the things I'd like to empower my families with, to find out what helps them and find out how to ask for that help in the appropriate places. So that's kind of what I'd like to talk about a little further. At this time, I have some specific questions I'd like to ask the star witnesses up here to give them an opportunity to elaborate on some of the work that they do. I also want to just say that, it's great coming after the first panel, because then we can talk about some of the things that they mentioned that we might be able to add a little information to as well. So with that, I'd like to start with I'd like to start talking about immigration a little. And one of the reasons I want to start with immigration is, as a judge in child protection, the only way I get contact with the immigration issue is when I watch the news, or when they come in and ask for a special immigrant status for a particular child. And often what I get as the state court judge is I get a child and a petition says the child was born in Guatemala. He was abused in Guatemala 10 years ago. Mom admits to the abuse, and it's an evidentiary issue. It's what's the quality of the evidence I'm getting? Oftentimes I'll get 2 birth certificates, because what they're asking me to do is adjudicate them award of the court that day. Right? So they want me to do a TC, an adjudicatory hearing, and a dispo hearing that day. And the child has to be under the age of 18. And so I will often get birth certificates that say the kid's 17, and then I'll get a birth certificate later in the testimony or the evidence that says he's 21. So it's always these issues of evidence that I have problems with. So tell me a little bit about how we can enforce immigration or require immigration to change that impacts children in a more positive way.
Thank you. That's a great question. And I think that you sitting where you sit, being confused and finding the process complicated and convoluted really just speaks to the absurdity of our processes for kids right now, and how complex it is. And so, it goes without saying, it's crazy to think a kid could do this without an attorney, right? They're not given attorneys in these proceedings. And it's very complicated. There's cultural issues, not to mention, the language and understanding and expectations. And I think that when Congress devised the one particular form of relief that you're talking about, the form of humanitarian protection for children who've been abused, abandoned, neglected, the idea was family court judges, state court judges, they understand families. They look at abuse situations. They look at neglect situations on a regular basis. They're going to have much more expertise in making those decisions than immigration adjudicators would. So the idea was, first, let's let those judges make those determinations. They're the ones who have the expertise. They know what questions to ask, what to be looking for, and then let the immigration adjudicators look at the immigration elements of it. That was the idea. It's not really working out right now. I will say just yesterday, one of my colleagues said that an immigration judge had ordered a child deported even though the family court judge had determined that she had been abused by the parent living in home country, and it was not in her best interest to return to the home country. It was in her best interest to stay in the United States. So we're seeing a breakdown of the congressional intent and really kind of farming out the expertise. I think what the real shortcoming is, as I mentioned before, in the history of immigration law, we were thinking of, for the most part, single men, right? We were thinking of, usually it was adult men who were coming to the United States first, maybe, and families and children would follow. And so kids were always thought of as derivatives or kind of secondary to an adult application, petition, what have you. And so there really wasn't, the immigration law hasn't evolved as much to really think about the best interest of the child. Over the years, there have been efforts to create a special visa that would be just about looking at what is the best interest of the child. We are a little bit more of a defensive posture these days on immigration and not, we haven't really been able to be offensive, but I think these ideas and really continuing to talk about making the law fit the situations and the person who it's intended for, and so thinking creatively about, for example, a best interest visa is going to be much more appropriate than trying to put a square peg in a round hole.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, I would just tag on to that, I think. In the state of California, we lump immigration services in with our civil justice system, which I know is not the case in every state, but in California, we sort of put them all together in understanding the system. And to tag onto that, the fact that the system, particularly under this administration, would have us all believe that deportation, removal proceedings of adults don't affect anyone but the adults. And the evidence is really clear that, so the New York right now has a universal representation system that adults who are facing deportation proceedings get an assigned attorney from one of 3 civil legal aid nonprofits in New York. And the Vera Institute did a pretty comprehensive study of that very successful, I mean, again, sort of back to the right to counsel question from the first panel, it makes a significant material difference to have a lawyer represent you in immigration court. And almost half, 47% of the folks who were facing removal proceedings and given a lawyer in New York were also parents. And in aggregate, during the time of the study, they were parents to almost 2,000 children. And so going back to those same cascading and clustering, it's very clear that when you very abruptly and unexpectedly remove a parent from a family, and they're detained because of immigration status, there's a whole host of civil legal issues that cascade from that and then also cluster around that. Housing, right, eviction, employment, lack of income to the family, and other sort of collateral civil legal needs. And so what was found was that providing adults facing deportation who were parents with counsel was actually a family reunification strategy, that was a collateral goal that project achieved. And particularly focusing on the bond hearing as a moment of legal intervention, meaning the moment where people are determined to either remain in custody pending their proceedings in immigration court or are released. That is necessarily family reunification. And so if you can get a parent out at the bond hearing moment, they're able to go back to their family, and it is a preventative move in terms of both the cascading and clustering civil legal issues that can come up if the parent is detained. So even though the administration would have us all believe that these are adult criminal actors that are being detained, what we're finding, and now in Los Angeles with the LA Justice Fund, which is seeking to replicate a version of New York's system, in which Clinic is wonderfully involved in, we believe that there will be similar collateral benefits to families and children as well.
Wonderful. So Liz, I'm fascinated by services for my families. I think one of the things that I come in contact with every day parents telling me that they're sent to parenting classes, there's not a kid in the whole auditorium, and they're watching a video about how to parent better. And somehow that's going to magically give them the skills that they need to then start utilizing on their children. So can you tell me a little bit about some of the work you're doing around making services more effective and efficient for our families and children?
I'm so sorry about this that's happening. Well, I guess the first thing that we start with is, I don't know how to say this, non-judginess. We leave our judging at the door. We walk hand in hand with them, and we are super fortunate to be able to take the time to do that, because I know not a lot of people can. I always used to say when I hired people for our programs, I wanted to get them right out of school because I didn't want anyone else to have messed them up already, because I want them to be in my cult, not in the, no, we don't want to do that cult, because I say, yes, let's do it. So my expectation really for the people who work with our families is we're not sending them to classes. We are going with them. We are participating. If we think that class was the dumbest thing we've ever witnessed, we are not sending anyone else back there, and we will literally say, this is useless. You guys should come up with better material. Or guess what? We will. And we do. So that's what we do. We have actually foster parent mentors that mentor biological families. Our BI program, the behavioral interventionists, part of their job is also modeling the de-escalation techniques and the super, super hard not taking it personally part, because it feels pretty personal most of the time, even though, when you're thinking about it, it's not you, it's what they've been through, but it feels really personal because don't call me fat, it hurts my feelings. So being able to be that support and walk them through all of that, and not only that, but and like you said, there's not, if someone says, I think I need something like this, if I have not heard of it, I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to figure out where it is, or we're going to do it here. And fortunately, the people that I'm surrounded with are the same way. I think our CFO and COO are a little anxious, but my mother and I have very similar attitudes. Oh, we'll figure it out. It'll be fine. We'll get it done. So walking hand in hand, we actually have a rapid reunification program. One is a shelter, and then my next endeavor is the parent aid program, which I'm super pumped about, which is the future next. So our rapid reunification shelter is if youth are brought into care and it's for something like inadequate housing or maybe neglect or a drug issue. It's not a repeat, it's not unknown violent offender. We know what it is, and we know it's something that we can safely reunify with within 90 days. We have a shelter that is super cool and high tech and looks like Google, but it is open to biological parents from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. They can come get their kids ready for school. They can, during the summer, come and swim out in the pool with them, play in the park. They can come be there for bedtime, bath time, homework time. It's actually the expectation that they're there as much as possible. We have a family liaison that gets that court order with all of the services that are listed that are like, what does that even mean? I don't know what does that mean I have to do? And walk them through it. And not just walk them through it, walk with them through it. We are taking them. Mileage is high. Thank goodness for mileage checks, like a bonus. But we will take them to get those things done. We don't expect, if I call Children's Division and say, hey, I just was wondering where my nephew is placed, it doesn't matter how much I know about the system or who I know, I'm not going to get any information. Imagine being someone who doesn't know anything about the system at all and trying to get something accomplished. I mean, I feel like most of the circuit managers can't even get things accomplished, and they're in charge. So it's very difficult. We want to be there to make sure that they're not only able to get the services, but we can help them understand what they mean and why they're important. And we make them, respect. They're people. I don't think that I've met a biological parent, and I've met, I've had some siblings who had terrible, terrible biological parents, serving life sentences, terrible biological parents. And I haven't met one that hasn't loved their child, that doesn't love their kids. It's circumstances. And we're going to do everything that we can to help them get their kids back, because that's where they belong. So we're not just saying do this, we are helping them do what they need to do, fighting for them in court, changing minds. It's really hard to get people to see what I see when I look at biological parents. Like, you walk into a house, oh, it's fantastic. So I was doing a home visit, a relative, sit down on the couch. She's like, yeah, I cleaned up. It's the middle of nowhere. I live in Missouri. So when you leave the city, it's like, and you're like, oh, it's murder rooms everywhere. Who knows what's happening in the mountains? I don't know. So I go out, and I'm like, this looks like a death house. But grandma lives there, nice lady. Sit down on the couch. The animals clearly have some bug issues. You can see them jumping. She's so loving and wonderful and has wonderful things to say about her grandkid, who is, he's not that much fun. I'll be real honest with you. But she loves him so much. The fact that, there is no door on the back of the trailer, and there's literally a horse's head sticking in. Not just the head, his body was behind it. It was alive. So, yeah, whew, because that would have been a different story. And the fact that when I tried to get up to leave, I was stuck to the couch, those aren't issues for me. I walk in there, and what I see is how much that grandma loves that kid. The rest of that can be fixed. We can just get a horse doggy door. I feel good about that. The couch, they make plastic covers, and really, as long as nobody sits down on it, like a big deal. Kids are sticky anyway, right? The bug issue, I can afford flea and tick stuff. I'll just go get that right now, and I'll drop it. I won't even make her feel bad. I'll come by and say I'm visiting, and just put that on them every couple months. It's not about getting kids with wart and June cleaver. That's not what ideal families are. Ideal families are people who love you no matter what. And the fact that we can say no because of ridiculous things, oh no, there's termites or roaches, guess what, there's exterminators. Oh, they don't have a floor, it's dirt, guess what, there's Home Depot. These are things that can be fixed, and the fact that we are saying that this child can't be in this family because of something like, exposed wires, that can be fixed. Or a hole in the roof, that can be fixed. Or the basement isn't finished. Guess what? I am really convincing at getting people to help finish basements. Boom. The fact that licensing workers will deny licensure because of something that I can get fixed drives me insane. You got to tell me about it. I'll get it done. I promise. I promise I will. So I need everyone to be in my head and to walk in and see what I see, which is how much they love the kid, not the rest of it. The rest of it is it's stuff. That's all. I'm sorry.
So for a couple seconds, I'd like to just talk about some of the things we're doing in our prevention courtroom, or trying to do in our prevention courtroom. I certainly wish I had Liz in my jurisdiction, but I'll have to take her words home to me, to the people I work with. A couple things. I think that our system, as much as we talk about looking at the positives of a family and the strengths of a family and empowering families, we still focus an awful lot of our attention on the risk of families. And so this court is designed not to do for the parent, but help the parent learn how to do for herself. So the day before I came here, I was in court, and I was issuing what I call them contracts, since I don't really have orders of protection, since there's no real jurisdiction. But the contract I was talking with the mother about, it's a domestic violence situation. And I told, and she's going to DV and taking DV classes, and our conversations when she comes to the session is, what are you learning? What are some of the things you're doing? How is that impacting your life? How does it make you better prepared to parent your children? And so we were outlining kind of some of the things she can do to help keep her children safe. And so she said to me, Judge Martin, does that mean that Joe Blow, whatever his name is, can't come in the house? And I said, well, I'm not going to tell you that. You're the mother. You have the responsibility to protect your children. The contract you have with me is to make certain your children's home is safe. Now, if you're going to DV and you're learning how to protect yourself and your children, and we know that he is not in DV, I would suggest to you that he's probably not safe to come into your home with you. And she said, Judge Martin, that's what I was thinking, but that's what I want. I don't want my parents reliant on a social worker or a judge to say, you can't go out and drink and smoke and do whatever. I want them to figure out how they can be safer for their children, because that's the only way we're going to keep them out of systems or get them out of systems safely. And so it's about helping mom learn how to keep her children safe. Now, a week ago, I had a mother come in and say to me, Judge Martin, I know that I need to get myself well. She has a really bad, severe drug problem. And I said, I agree with you. We have to get you healthy so you can provide a safe and healthy environment for your children. And she said, to be honest, Judge Martin, I can't get myself safe and healthy right now. And I said, I understand that. Well, what would you like to do to protect your children? And she says, do I have to go and get a case filed in order to do a guardianship? And I said, no, absolutely not. And so the point is, she loved her children so much that she knew she had to provide safety and well-being for her children, but she also knew that she couldn't do it right now herself. And so she was amenable to doing a guardianship with a relative until she felt that she could get healthy herself. Ladies and gentlemen, I agree with Liz. Our families love their children. They have different ways of expressing that love oftentimes, and oftentimes they have to be helped to understand how to best love their children at this particular time. It is not the same for every mother who comes into my courtroom, whether it's under one of my regular petition courtrooms or my prevention courtroom. It is different and it looks different for every little Sally Sue, and it looks different for every mother that comes and every father that comes into my courtrooms. The last thing I want to talk about is, let's not forget that rich kids need help too. And I hesitate to say this, and I can only say it around people who know this work well. So there are two components of this. One is Black people, and although I'm not all the other minorities, I will include all the other minorities too. Oftentimes, when they do the same things that white rich families do, they are not treated the same way. My brother is an orthopedic surgeon, and he is married to a white, so don't tell my brother this when you see him, okay? So he's married to a white woman, and all four of his children are mixed. Now, he has 2 boys and 2 girls, and they are rambunctious, and I love them, okay? But they break every bone that's known to mankind all the time. So they live in Alaska, and you're saying, your brother lives? Yes, my brother lives in Alaska. And so his youngest daughter broke her arm at school. And so the mother was home. She doesn't work outside the home, so she rushed over to and it was a different hospital than where my brother's on staff, okay? So she rushed over to the hospital to be with Manila in the emergency room, and then she had some kind of meeting she had to go to, so my brother canceled his last surgery and then went to the hospital to be with Manila. When he got there, now, so when Susan was there, they took her in the emergency room and asked for her insurance and started treating Manila. When he got there, they started asking him, where was he at the time that Manila got hurt? What, all this about how he treats his children. Now, My brother is very patient, but he wasn't patient that afternoon because he didn't know what was going on with his child, and he's an orthopedic surgeon, so he wanted to talk with the doctor. But again, so that's one thing to remember. I live in Chicago where the Walgreen family lives, and I read in the newspaper that they do things to their children, hanging them out of windows, that if one of my families on the south side or west side did, they would bypass the temporary custody hearing and send the parent to jail right then and there. And so I don't want us to forget that when we talk about overrepresentation, we also have to think about underrepresentation. That does not mean I want more children in foster care. God knows I don't want that. But I do want the right children in foster care. And so don't forget that there are some of our communities which are underrepresented as well. And if we are going to be good at what we do in protecting children, we have to also make certain that we keep that in mind. The last thing I'll say about the court and one of the pillars of our prevention court is I can't overemphasize this whole deal about helping families help themselves, because the goal is to get out of their lives. And if your life's anything like mine, you have ups and downs. Some days are great and things are going along smoothly, and other times you are in the pits and there's a lot of stuff that you need to help you and your family. And so I don't envision that once my families leave my prevention courtroom that their lives are going to be smooth sailing forever. And what I want to be able to say is that this family is not the Huxtables, but this family knows the importance of keeping their children safe. Whoa, that was bad. Bill Cosby. Wow. That was really bad. Whoa, I didn't even see. Whoa. Okay, forget that analogy. But the point is, I want my families to know how to keep their children safe and how to keep them safe. I want them to be able to do that without coming into a system. I want them to know that, and remember, a lot of my families don't trust our systems and have not had good experiences in our systems. And so we need to help them understand how to navigate those systems. As a public defender, the smartest people I ever met were my guys who were heads of gangs. These guys were brilliant. I mean, they had structures that I think rival IBM. I mean, they knew how to keep people in order, and they had layers of middle management, high management. They had rules. It's not that they couldn't make it in life, they just didn't do it in a legal way. My families know what they need for their children, and I'm going to tell you one quick story. In my petition courtroom, in the regular courtroom where there's a petition filed, it was a mother, and the child was basically, do you know Munchausen disease? It's very rarely charged, but when it is charged, it's something to really pay attention to. So essentially, when the child was in the mother's care, the child kept losing weight. When the child went to the hospital, the child was gaining weight. And so eventually, we put the child in the grandmother's home. The story is a positive story in the end, but it's ugly to get to the end. And so the social worker went to the grandmother's home to check on the well-being of the child, and she came into court and filed an emergency motion. And the allegation was the grandmother was giving the child liquor. Well, the child was gaining weight in the grandmother's home, so I'm curious, what kind of liquor are you feeding this infant, and the infant's growing? But anyway, so we come in and we do a hearing. The social worker failed to ask what liquor meant to this grandmother, because what the grandmother was doing was boiling collard greens. And the juice from the greens she called pot liquor. Well, with all the nutritions in the greens, the baby was growing. Now, that's a positive thing, right? But the negative part is the trauma we put that family through, coming to think they were going to come to see the judge because she was going to take away the grandbaby. And I would suggest to you, those are the types of things that we have control over. And so I'm trying to create a trauma-free environment for my families to learn how to help themselves. And so if you have any ideas, and Liz, if you want to move to Chicago, okay. But let's get to the audience questions right now so the audience can participate. And I certainly know that my ladies, are willing to answer any questions about their specific programs in a moment when we finish during the lunch break. So ladies and, thank you. Oh, golly. Okay. So in your sphere of influence, wherever you work, whether it's a court, a social agency, a service provider, and you had a magic wand, how could you make the system more responsive to our families and to our children? If you can kind of plug in on that with a short phrase, a short sentence, what do you think you could do that would be like the answer so our systems are more responsive to our families? I think that as all of the ladies have spoken about, what did I do this time? Yeah. Oh, okay. I thought I did something wrong here again. As the ladies spoke about here, I think one of the things that we have to really make certain we do is think about our children and our families as just that, our children and our families. When I first became the presiding judge, I went to a meeting with social workers, and the social worker in an auditorium full of people, and I'm on the stage, she's going to try to convince me that it's okay that the foster mother treats her bio family different than her foster children. And I thought to myself, I don't know a lot about this field yet, but that's the last thing I want to hear from one of my families, because my responsibility is not only to make certain the homes are safe for my children, but also appropriate for my children. And if you're not, I tell people all the time that I would bet anyone, if any of my children had Harriet and William as parents, they would make it. Any parent that can love you through all the garbage my parents had to go through, they can make it. And that's what my children lack, is someone, no matter what happens, they know that they'll always be loved and cared for. So let's look at some of the responses. Keep ICE out of my community. That's great, I love it. In-home services, that is something that I'm beginning to believe that is so very powerful for our families. Cultural change, and I think cultural change requires more than just painting a building or getting a new building with child-friendly seats and chairs. I agree with you. Meaningful prevention services. We've worked towards trying to reduce the number of kids coming into care. We've tried through ASFA to get kids out of care sooner. I think it's time that we start talking about making certain that we keep our families together, since we know kids, where do kids go when they leave our foster care systems? They go home. No matter how bad they've been abused or neglected, the first thing they want to do is go home. So why aren't we taking the resources that we have, strengthening our families, getting our children back in those families? Does anyone else want to comment on some of this?
First of all, I'd like to say it's not fair you get 2 birth certificates, because we don't get any. My brother Nathan and I actually do a presentation on that the treating people to. It's called That's Not Fair. It's just a riot. He was adopted when he was 13. Trauma. Yeah, it was, like super traumatic, but don't let him know that I feel bad for him. But we do that, that's not fair, and why on the outside it looks like it's not fair, but actually it's because I'm not, stealing things. That's why, and I'm 6 years older, so I do get to stay out a little bit later. It's not that you're being punished. So we do a whole thing on that, so stay tuned for that someday. the the asking questions that going into the home and the cultural differences and not knowing what liquor. So what I always tell my wonderful people that go out to ask questions. So tell me what that looks like. So what I hear you saying is this. Is that accurate, or does it look differently? Because I say things out loud sometimes, and God only knows what that means. Like, I have no idea. Even after I said it, I don't know what I said. So I want to clarify, especially if there's any confusion. I'm not going to, I threw out my jump to conclusions mat a long time ago. I ask every time, tell me what that looks like to you. What does that mean to you? Because what it means to me in my entitled life, where I get told to slow down when I'm speeding instead of pulled over and shot, is a little bit different. So I want to know what it looks like for you. So I think if we're able to ask and able to own, you know, I'm super able to own my privilege. I haven't seriously gotten a ticket in 12 years. I speed all the time. I don't even get it. But I know that, and I can own it, but I want to know their points of view. I'm not going to assume what someone else is thinking or doing, or why it's okay or why it's not okay. So ask questions if you don't know. It's okay. You can ask questions. It's okay to feel like an idiot sometimes.
Let's talk about our next question. Thank you very much for your responses. Well, does anyone in the audience want to shout out anything else? Yes, please. So the question is, have I measured outcomes from the prevention court? No, but I have Chapin Hall that's working with me to get some numbers. Chapin Hall, I don't know, most of you have heard of Brian Samuels. Brian's over at Chapin Hall now, and Brian knows me very well. So when he gives me all the statistics for my court, he gives me this really beautiful pamphlet that's all printed up and all that stuff, and then he gives me the remedial copy for Pat, because I can't figure out those scales. So Brian's over there helping me figure out exactly what I need to keep track of and kind of helping me measure those outcomes. So when I get some, I'll certainly share them. Okay? Let's talk about our next question, ladies and gentlemen. So we have the magic wand. We just got the hook. Okay. So I'm sorry we didn't get to our last question. I really do apologize, ladies. I'm so sorry. Thank you so very, very much for sharing the stage and all your expertise with us.